Now, these two have been in very much conflict, but what most people don't know is that Abraham, in his old age, took a third wife. That third wife's name was Keturah. It's in the Bible. Very few Bible people know that it exists because they didn't think it was important. Baha'u'llah says he is descended from Keturah. In the spirit of Keturah being the third wave, so to speak, we Baha'is are the spiritual descendants of Keturah through Baha'u'llah. And they have yet a different mission to carry out, and yet it's in harmony with the missions of the Arabs in Islam, the Christians through Christ, and the Jews through the call of Abraham, or call of Moses. Now here's what's interesting. I mentioned that Hagar had Ishmael, Sarah had Isaac, and it says that Keturah had sons, but particularly identifies her grandsons, Sheba and Dedan. They were sent eastward, away from the land of Israel. Now here's where it gets interesting. If we're the spiritual descendants of Keturah, we are, in a sense, the spiritual descendants of Sheba and Dedan. In the Bible, in the prophecy of Armageddon, the last and final war, the great confrontation, Sheba and Dedan are there proclaiming, why are you attacking Israel? There's no reference, nobody knows why Sheba, what are Sheba and Dedan doing there? It's because Sheba and Dedan, symbolic of the spiritual forces of Baha'u'llah, speaking out in this day and time to the invading armies that come to destroy Israel. Just a little fascinating side thing to notice. And that's why I say again, only those of us that have been made aware of this can understand and unravel many of the mysteries that are in the prophecies. Moving on.
There is the servant sent by Abraham on behalf of Isaac to find a bride from among the family of believers, looking for signs of guidance.
Okay, now, here's what's interesting. When it came time for Ishmael to get married, he married a woman from Egypt, like his mother was an Egyptian, but she was not a believer. That's interesting to note. It notes it in the Bible that Ishmael did not marry a believer, but an Egyptian woman who was not a believer. His mother was not necessarily, although we don't know what her faith was. We have to assume that she was a believer. Now, in this particular case, Sarah wants to make sure that her son does not marry an unbelieving person. But the only believers other than the immediate family there are back in Syria, where they stopped off on their way to Israel. There her family lives. So Abraham commands a servant, his foreman, to go to the land where the relatives are living and to find a wife for Isaac among the believing women. And then we come to the next part, B.
So then we have Rebecca, who is the beauty, the virtue, the water, and the camels. She is the sister of Laban.
Okay, now, here's what's interesting. The young man who's sent to find a wife, I'm going to suggest to you there's a lesson to be learned. He doesn't know any of these people. He doesn't know who to choose. So he prays to God and says, Lord, let's arrange something here to take place. When I go to the well, every village has a well. When I come to the well, let me go up and request of the maidens that will be standing around the well drawing water, if I might have some water. And if one of them says, not only will I give you water, but let me water your camels as well, let that be a sign of her generosity, of her virtue, and that this might be the one. So he comes to the well, and there's several maidens there, and he walks up and he says, gee, I'm thirsty, could I have some water? And of course they had to have buckets and things to dip water with. And one of the maidens steps forward, and she's the most beautiful of all the maidens. And she says, sir, not only would I give you some water, but let me water your camels as well. So then he thinks, oh, so is this the one? So he says to Rebecca, or ask her, what is your name? I'm Rebecca. And what family do you come from? I'm the daughter of Laban. In other words, a cousin to Isaac. And in those days, that was the desirable thing, to marry a believer from the believers, because you knew they were raised to know God. So now he's real excited. So he tells her why he's come. She says, you have to talk to my father. So goes to Laban and says to Laban, you know, I'm here, I'm from Abraham, and I'm supposed to find a wife. And I said this to the Lord, and the Lord did this, and I did that, and I've chosen that Rebecca is to be the one. And Laban says, well, this is something she has to decide for herself. If she wishes to go and meet a man she's never met, go with a stranger who walked out of the desert, and she says, I can tell that this is truly a sign from God. I happily go with him to meet my husband that God has ordained for me. So she goes with him. And it says in the Bible that when Rebecca sees Isaac, and when Isaac sees her, instant love is formed. He falls in love with her immediately. She loves him. And they become husband and wife. Now, what's the message in this? I would like to suggest that when we are dedicated to changing history, and when we understand that family is the foundation by which we build the future, that we should take very seriously who we marry, that we choose someone who has the same commitment to God's purposes as we do, who has a vision that we can work together to form the fortress of well-being, to bring children into a world in a united family. Because unity is our message. But it begins in the family, and it begins between a man and a woman. And when these two come together with that commitment, with that understanding, with that purpose, aside from their attraction to each other, this is a marriage truly made in heaven. Such marriages will produce extraordinary results. We need to become more conscious of this, because this goes all the way back to those early days. And the foundation they built this has been going on for 4,000 years. It's been 4,000 years that covenant was began, and for 4,000 years we've been keeping it. That's something to... Why do you think the Jews are still present with us today through all they've been through? The strength of their families and the strength of their commitment to God and to the covenant God made with Abraham. It's still strong, and we need to learn from them this great truth. Now, the story of Jacob and Esau. First of all, Rebekah and Isaac have two sons. What's interesting, they're twins. Most people didn't know that. And in fact, they had an interesting thing happen. While she was giving birth, one of the babies stuck his hand out. And they always wanted to identify who was the oldest, who's born first, because there's certain responsibilities and gifts that go with being first. They tied a ribbon around his wrist to identify the firstborn. But then the baby pulled his hand back into the womb, and out popped the other child. Which one is the firstborn becomes the question. The one that actually came out first, or the one that stuck his hand out and got the band tied to it? Now, Esau was recognized by the general society of the time as the firstborn. His brother, Jacob, is the one with the little band around his wrist, but he comes out second. Okay.
So Esau sells his birthright for a bowl of soup.
Here's the birthright. He's the firstborn. He gets the blessing of God that will reverberate for generations spiritually, not necessarily materially. It's a spiritual blessing of destiny.